Had a little hemorrhoid problem that I decided to go to the doctor for, but I was really embarrassed about it. And so I had a few other things I needed my doctor to check into. And so I decided I would kind of go through that list of things first. And as my doctor started to realize that things were starting to taper down, like he just walked out. And so then I started to panic a bit, thinking, okay, this is my opportunity here to tell him about the main reason I came. I had a nurse come in to the office, and I was like, "Hey, could you like go back and get the doctor?" She did. She ran out and got the doctor, and he came back in. And he's like, "What's up?" And I'm like, "I have hemorrhoids." He looked at me and he's like, "Show me," which I was not at all prepared for. I did. I showed him, which he confirmed it was hemorrhoids. But this probably was a really pivotal moment for me in my reflux journey because this was way before I was having any sort of persistent symptoms, right? This was an opportunity, actually, and you may not realize it, I certainly didn't at the time, for my doctor to have told me that things are going terribly wrong, right? And I'll come back to this story because this is one of 7 sort of groupings of bizarre reflux symptoms that you may or may not realize are associated with your reflux. And I'll tell you how that ended up for me at the end. He could have saved me, 15 years of hell dealing with reflux, especially towards the end there. But unfortunately, that's not how that turned out. Now, you may not realize that some of the other symptoms you're dealing with that don't seem to be reflux related actually probably are. I've spoken to hundreds of people over the last few years, whether that's through my one-on-one coaching calls, through different messaging systems, and I think that on the whole, I dealt with symptoms that were far worse than most people. Not everybody, but most people. And what I would say is some of the things I'm going to cover here was on the list of something like 50 symptoms I was dealing with. A lot of people don't deal with quite as many, but the thing I wanted to raise to your attention is the fact that many of these things can definitely be interrelated and connected in ways that you may not have expected. So at the time I was dealing with them, I really had no idea they were connected to reflux. So this is why I want to raise your attention. And I do see that some folks are joining the live call. I will also be answering questions. And so if you've got questions you want to drop in, I will try to get to those towards the end here. So the first grouping of symptoms that I wanted to mention is kind of in the space of brain fog, memory issues, concentration issues. And these are things that really started to plague me pretty early on in my reflux journey. I didn't really make the connection to why this was happening, but I associated it with a number of changes that were going on in my life. So I just got married, started to have more responsibility at work, and so things got a little bit more stressful. And so I thought, the anxiety I was feeling, the hesitation, the difficulty making decisions, concentration, all those things were because of that. Not really making the connection back to my reflux. My kids, they definitely noticed what was going on. Not making the connection to reflux necessarily, but at the dinner table, they'd be like, "Hey, Dad, you remember that time that we did this thing?" And I'm like, "I don't. No, I don't remember." And it just kind of became a thing. Like, Dad just doesn't remember. Like, that was just a constant issue for me. Like focusing, like I struggled to even like connect the plots on movies. And so I just found myself sitting in a movie for a couple hours, just watching the action as it came through, not being able to follow the thread all the way through. I had the same sort of struggle when I was talking to people, particularly as I got later and more advanced in my reflux. Like even just having simple conversations, like I would forget what they were talking about at the very beginning, which made it really sort of difficult to have any sort of engagement conversations. I would get super embarrassed, anxious, also another one of these I'll throw in here, depression as well. And so I got to a point where I really started avoiding people because it was just too stressful to deal with them. Now I didn't know at the time, but many of these symptoms are actually a side effect of things like low vitamin or vitamin deficiencies, which is super common with reflux, or a side effect of leaky gut, which sounds like a really weird made-up name, but is a medical condition that speaks to lesions or gaps in the stomach lining, which can allow food and bacteria, viruses, and other things to enter into the bloodstream. And these things can sort of manifest with cognitive issues like I was dealing with. But also, both of these things can be directly attributed to the next grouping of symptoms that I dealt with. So, waking up every morning with headaches, like not feeling refreshed, not feeling like I rested very well, even though I was like something like 8 hours of sleep. Sometimes I would get 8 or 9 or 10 hours just trying to get ahead. And invariably, I would find that I would just like knock out in the middle of the week. So, come Wednesday or Thursday, I hit the couch hard, didn't wake up for a few hours, got up, ate some dinner, and then went to sleep again. And then again, woke up the next day not feeling refreshed. Like this was just a cycle. To the point when I got almost to the very end of my reflux, when things got really bad, like super escalated, I just really had sort of forgotten what it felt like to feel rested. And it wasn't until I started to go through my healing approach that I felt for the first time in like 15, 20 years what it felt like to like feel good in the morning. Like I remembered, but it had been so long, I just kind of got into the routine of just never having enough sleep, never feeling rested, never feeling good. In fact, one of the stories that I share in my book, How I Cured My Silent Reflux, was the fact that anytime I did any sort of road trip with my family, my wife would have to stay up, and we're driving late at night. She'd have to like feed me, talk to me, try to keep me awake, because I would invariably like start to nod off and fall asleep, which is super dangerous for us, but also for my kids that were in the car. Just always feeling exhausted. Again, these are signs of deficiencies which are related to reflux. Or this next category, which I would like to summarize it as sort of night sweats. So I used to have to keep my temperature, like my thermostat, at like 69 degrees. And if it wasn't at 69 degrees with the fan on, like I struggled with the night sweat. It was really bad. I'd wake up in the middle of the night in a pool of sweat, overheating, but also throughout the day. Like I could very easily go from feeling nice and cool to being completely overheated. If I got embarrassed or if anything sort of raised my temperature, if I started walking too vigorously, like I was just constantly on the verge of being overheated. And that is also a side effect of some of these vitamin deficiencies, which are super common with reflux. Next category, muscle spasms. So my wife used to complain that I would kick her in the middle of the night. Not too painfully, but it'd just be like a little kick, right? And so she'd have to wake me up, get me to kind of move into a better position. And this was just a common thing. But what I didn't realize, again, with the vitamin deficiencies are things like magnesium and other things that are deficient. You just don't have the level of relaxation in the muscles that you need when you're trying to sleep. And you can very easily kind of go into these twitching fits, which my wife would like to call them. So that has completely gone away. And by the way, I still twitch, so some of that probably was just natural. It's probably just me. Now, one thing that I hear quite often from people that I didn't directly experience, but I'll bring it up because it's a common occurrence in my one-on-one calls, ringing ears. So getting to a point where your ears are constantly ringing, or one that I did experience, which is a lot of times after you eat, some level of fullness in the ears, or feeling like there's a bit of moisture going on in the ears. That's super common. And oops, that's my super common, and a side effect of one of the next items that I'm going to talk about here. So 1 in 10 doctors actually don't recognize this form of reflux, which is the form of reflux that I dealt with. It's called silent reflux. And what happens with silent reflux most often is that you've got a level of aerosolization that's going on with your reflux. And so you don't have the typical heartburn symptoms. You may not have regurgitation in the throat, but instead the acid is aerosolized and it can travel up into your throat, into your nose, also into your ears, which can tie back to the last item that I mentioned. You get a lot of mucus, post-nasal drip, like super obnoxious, and something that I dealt with particularly the worst towards the end of my reflux saga. And so, these are a handful of very bizarre reflux symptoms that I wanted to raise to your attention, but I also want to talk about kind of what's going on there. So I'm going to come back to my hemorrhoid story. So my doc was like, show me. And I did. And he's like, yeah, that's hemorrhoids. Now, Unfortunately, this was his opportunity to save me from like 15 years of dealing with reflux. Unfortunately, he was not clued into the sort of canary in the coal mine situation that hemorrhoids are. So a lot of times doctors believe that hemorrhoids are just a sign of things like low fiber, or it could be a sign of too much stress. So my doctor told me that because I was lifting weights, which is one of the things he asked me in my sort of pre medical examination interview, is that I was lifting too much weights, and so maybe I caused a little bit of a hernia or something like that, or maybe I was wiping too hard, and so he just prescribed a little bit of hemorrhoid cream. So for the next 20 years, not making the connection between my hemorrhoids and my reflux, I spent a lot of time taking care with the paperwork, if you know what I mean, but also trying to avoid lifting too hard. Like I went to the gym, right? But he completely missed the diagnosis, because after I healed my reflux, my hemorrhoids went away, right? And since then, I've gone and I've looked up hemorrhoids, and there's more of that connection being made. Like you can go research it for yourself, and you'll see that people are recognizing that there is an association between these symptoms and reflux. But it wasn't known at the time that I needed him to tell me that I was heading down a bad path. I think because this was, several years before my reflux started becoming a regular thing. I could have just changed my diet at the time, but unfortunately, I wasn't really given that opportunity. Now, here's the thing that I want to make a connection for you guys with for all these things. So, vitamin deficiencies are certainly an issue, but those come downstream of reflux. Reflux is, for the most part, a low stomach acid issue. Intuitively, we think it's a high stomach acid issue, like too much stomach acid, which is called hyperchlorhydria. If you look that up, it's a medical term that really has no coverage, because beyond having a medical definition, there's not really a lot of clinical cases or anything that they can speak to. Although, we hear from our doctors we have too much stomach acid, so there's a disconnect there. However, achlorhydria, which is sort of like neutral stomach acid, has a bit more on the medical cases, but hypochlorhydria is actually the most prevalent, and it's the one that you're going to find a lot of literature about, and this is the low stomach acid case. Now, why is low stomach acid the issue for reflux? Well, if you think about it, just considering your body's inability to digest food, you're going to have a level of indigestion, and so that food is going to sit on the stomach for too long. It's going to become fermented. It's going to create gases, going to put upward pressure on your lower esophageal sphincter, which, by the way, that's the weakest direction. Between that, acid exposure, poor signaling, which can come from low stomach acid to both your lower esophageal sphincter and your pyloric sphincter, which allows food to empty into the stomach, your sphincter is not going to function properly. Not only that, but it also requires a level of hormones that are produced by the good bacteria in your colon. And so if all these things are out of whack, the very least of your problems is your lower esophageal sphincter is not functioning correctly and keeping everything contained. But even worse than that, you're unable to digest your food, you're unable to absorb vitamins correctly, you're unable to produce the hormones that conduct your entire digestive system. Eventually, those same hormone deficiencies will lead to cognitive decline, memory issues, concentration issues, all the things that I spoke to. The lack of inflammatory control, which is also a key function of your gut bacteria, is also a key and direct indication and reason for things like hemorrhoids. And so all this stuff is connected in ways that I was not explained by my doctor. And so, some of the key vitamin deficiencies that are going to start with some of these other sort of non-reflux symptoms, right? The things that I talked about, not the classical reflux symptoms, are things like B12 deficiency, calcium deficiency, iron deficiency, zinc deficiency, magnesium deficiency. These are all downstream of low stomach acid, because when your stomach acid is low, it's not able to catalyze the vitamin absorption in your small intestine. It's also not able to attract and unlock the enzymes that your body needs to properly digest food. And so all these things sort of happen downstream of low stomach acid issues. So the way that I tackle low stomach acid issues is described in my 3-step plan, which you'll find a link in the description below. Definitely invite you to check that out if you believe that you've got a low stomach acid issue going on. Now, I see there are a handful of folks here on the call. I'm going to check and see if I've got any questions in the chat, and I'll try to address those. Let's see. Yeah. So I am not seeing any questions on the chat, but guys, I'm going to be doing lives on a more regular basis here. So if you do have questions, you could look for me at another time next week, and I'd be happy to answer them. So thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next one.